All right, question on the meaning of life. Small topic here, but that's apropos for Course on World Religions. So, uh, this really is looking more at the atheist's attempt, or the non theist, or you may even just say secular attempt, to give some accounting for how life can be meaningful for a person. Specifically, if we don't allow ourselves to draw upon any theistic assumptions in the process. How could we really give a description of a human life as something meaningful if there's no God to give it meaning or to give the universe meaning? Seems like in order for an individual human life to be meaningful, there's got to be a meaning giver out there to make the world, the universe, genuinely meaningful in order for our individual life within it to be meaningful. So we can say one thing religion does is it certainly gives us options for with various ways in which we can not only describe life as meaningful, but live with the sense of it being meaningful because we see ourselves as living from that religious perspective that gives life meaning. It's not just a story in a book. If you're really living the religious life, you're living a life that seems meaningful to you. And the reason it does can be kind of clearly laid out in most religious perspectives. Um, so there isn't a huge problem with being able to see how a human life might be meaningful from within religion. It might be hard to understand the details. There's disagreement, obviously, over what the details are. And it might be hard to do, but we can get an understanding of what a meaningful life would look like if it were lived, fundamentally under or exhibiting one of the religions that we've looked at. So that does seem to be kind of like a problem, a challenge, let's say, a challenge that the atheist or secularist would face because it's not a great situation for a person to not be able to see their life as meaningful. I mean, arguably, that's something that we need to do. Even if we don't see our individual life as actually meaningful, that we have some understanding of how a life could be meaningful so that we've got something to strive for, something that makes it all like gives a point to things. Even if your own life doesn't yet, it could be, and there's something to go for. But what if there was no real sense of what a meaningful life is? Because you might think that science just gives us kind of like a dead view of a dead universe. Say this, dead inert matter, as they say. If that's all there is to the universe, just a bunch of matter scattered around here and there and now and then, where's the meaning going to come from? I mean, we can make stuff up, but how great is that if we're just making stuff up? On the other hand, maybe there's like exciting versions of making stuff up, creating something that atheists or secularists can draw upon and say, yeah, that's what a meaningful life turns out to be. So this question is really getting you into that classic debate. Tolstoy, I think, famously exhibits this kind of tension that I want you to look at here when I believe he was on his deathbed. And I think just very late in life, he was, quote, losing his religion. Tolstoy's the great Russian novelist. Losing his religion, and he was a Christian, and I guess came to disbelieve in the truth of God, like right at the end. And I think even on his very deathbed, he was said to have been terrified by the implications of coming to believe that there is no God. Because as he put it, everything would be permitted. There's no more divine forbiddance because there's no more divine. And that just seemed to pull the rug out from under him for morality. Pretty much getting to the kind of same thing here. Does it pull the rug out from under us for meaning? So in class, we really looked at two pretty decent attempts to explain how individual lives might turn out to be meaningful from a secular point of view, a non-religious point of view, which doesn't mean that there's no room for understanding and caring about religion in these points of views, but that's not what we're basing the meaning of our life on. So there are people that do that. We call them atheists. We could say secular, just non-theists, whatever. Maybe people that ordinary, a lot of ordinary people that just don't have a decided religious identity or religious faith might fall into this as well. So how can lives like that be meaningful? So lots of things to discuss here, obviously, but I'm going to kind of cut to the chase to look at how you're going to set up this particular topic. So, we looked at examples of how I'm just going to say atheist, might do this from Nietzsche in the Three Metamorphoses of the Soul, a very famous piece of his, and how that could be told as, well, what it kind of sounds like, a tale of human transformation. And if we can kind of interpret the meaning of the Three Metamorphoses, maybe that interpretation of its meaning, the way that we interpret fables and allegories and such, would actually be an illumination of what a meaningful life can be for an atheist, or at least his atheist conception of the meaning of life. Nietzsche might like us to put it like that. So that's there as a good, and I would think suggested resource to draw upon for this question. I've got here, or a member of the New Atheists. That's okay. We really didn't discuss them in class, and I would just say this. It's fine to use them instead of, let's say, Nietzsche, um, but make sure that it fits. So you really want to have something from Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, I think. There's a guy I wrote about who did the Narnia Chronicles that was based on a trilogy of books called, God, I have the name of this right, His Dark Materials, I think it was called. Kind of forgetting the author's name at this point, but I wrote something on him a little while back. He's one also. And yeah, Daniel Dennett might be. So there's a lot of people there. And, if you want to talk about one of them, that's fine, even though we didn't do it in class, just so long as it fits just as well as these other things that we did talk about in class fit. So make sure about that. So you don't have to. I wouldn't, I don't know, maybe lean against it, but unless you've got like a really good discussion that you can kind of like make it work. So that's fine. But the other one we did was Robert Nozick, and here just to make clear, we looked at Nozick's definition of value and meaning in class in some detail, and here I would be expecting you to pretty much lay out that theory of Nozick's value and meaning in the way that you would be kind of laying out Nietzsche's thing on the Three Metamorphoses. If, follow me here, you're going to choose Nozick as the example of the atheist or kind of secular conception of the meaning of life. So let me kind of like sum that up of like what you'll need to do here. Basically select one or two, I'm going to say that, one or two of those three to pretty much set the basis for the question as a whole. It's kind of like the discussion that you're going to be developing all throughout is really focused on, I would say, have it focused on one. I should say this more stoutly. Have it focused on one, kind of like in the other cases. Introduce the other as the contrast case, but you're really still having kind of foregrounding either Nietzsche, the three metamorphoses of the soul, or foregrounding one of the members of the New Atheists, or foregrounding Nozick and this definition of value and meaning that we went over in class as the kind of like, foregrounded, kind of theme defining part of your paper as a whole. Then enter other points as needed. You don't need to bring in one of those three that I've got listed there between the Nietzsche, New Atheists, and Nozick. You can just, boom, make one your focus and go. In some ways, that's preferable just because you can get in more detail. In some ways, the less different new things you introduce. On the other hand, in class, we talked about a lot of ways that these two things can be connected. So that can work. Okay, so now you are going to be connecting this to Jung and this definite conception of human transformation. So yeah, I don't really think I'm going to have too much to say there. I think it's kind of like, it's self-explanatory in a sense, I think. It's not easy or obvious how you can connect those two, right? How are you going to connect Nietzsche with William Young and that textbook? And what really is kind of like a textbook definition, literally, of the religious life, and applying that to Nietzsche. So that could go lots of different ways. I'm kind of, it's, in a way here, really, just kind of take that where it takes you. If you can get to the point where you've got a nice, clear interpretation of what Nietzsche means as the meaning of life based on your interpretation of the three metamorphoses, I think you're kind of in a position to give like a careful little comparison to the Young definition and just kind of go like step by step and see how it applies, and whatever results from that, it applies how it applies. So that's one thing. With Nozick, I can totally see like the account of meaning that he gives. Well, it's certainly very. So the account of meaning that Nozick gives seems to really fit easily with the general idea of human transformation in response to perceived ultimacy. I mean, if you kind of form a picture of that in your head, it kind of sounds like one of these organic unities that Nozick's discussing. Even more so, it just kind of sounds like a relation between organic unities, which is exactly how Nozick's describing meaning as a valuable relation between valuable things. That means it's an organic unity of organic unities. Think about it, right? So do we have that when we've got human transformation in response to perceived ultimacy? It sure looks like it. I can see that. However, now the question for the atheist is, do we have that when you can't put God in as one of the organic unities? For example, as what we were calling organic unity number two? Are you going to be able to do it? Well, yeah, actually, it looks like you can. And in class, we went over some pretty, almost ordinary ways um, in which you can create these organic unities without God, basically. You can still create organic unities of organic unities. So looks like you can do it on Nozick's view, and you can have a kind of transformation that is still meaning giving. You can have kinds of human transformations that are meaning giving, even if they're not specifically religious. I think that would be one way of kind of running a discussion with Nozick. There's kind of other ways that you can do it, but you want to be connecting that idea of human transformation as kind of like the core of the spiritual life, and then seeing how and if that would be captured by one of these people's conception of a meaningful life. Does that really capture enough of what Jung was meaning by like the core of the spiritual life as transformation, so that we can see, yeah, that kind of speaks in favor of the depth and significance of that non-theistic conception of meaning. It really does kind of capture enough of what we mean by the kind of important spiritual life that man wants. Okay, so then the other thing here is to kind of compare what do we get at the end of the day from this non-religious perspective to one of the ways in which religion goes about answering that same question. So here it's kind of taking the religions that we've studied outside of the standard context of like the worldview and the human transformation, and kind of saying this, well, like, let's say like from a Buddhist point of view, what would they say is the meaning of life? Or you would kind of like approach it as basically comparing the kind of religious spiritual life to this non-theistic meaningful life. How do these lives compare? This non-theistic meaningful life that we can get the idea of either from Nozick or Nietzsche, even if you don't agree with it, that would be the idea for these atheists, is that we still can kind of like have these kinds of meaningful lives. What does that look like in comparison to religiously meaningful lives? Same, different? Now you're kind of just off making the kinds of comparisons that I've been asking you to do, really throughout all these questions. So that's how you can get to that part of the question. And at this point, I think you're pretty much at the end. So one thing that we talked about a little bit in class, I'll kind of mention here, is that you, I think, can nicely apply the blues as a way of giving meaning to suffering as a non-theistic, meaning-giving practice that human beings have actually done. It's actually, there's a track record there, a history of it, and we've looked at some of that in class. And one nice thing that's just there as a possibility, and obviously I have my own personal interest in this, so kind of mentioning this is like one way that you could end up doing this or kind of integrating into your answer might be there in your work on that assignment we did on religion and the blues. But here, kind of in a much different way, looking at just the way that the practice and the psychological experience that goes into it. And blues was called the devil's music. It's certainly got connections to gospel, and there's all kinds of like possible and multifarious and really quite interesting connections between Christianity in particular and the blues. To some extent, Islam also, if you kind of look at the civil rights movement and stuff. But In class, we looked briefly at how putting a experience of suffering into the context of either creating your own blues song or listening to, hearing the blues music performed by others, which is still about a kind of contextualized suffering, you might say, put to music, that allows you to contextualize your own suffering, that generates a framework of understanding for your suffering, and that's good and healing, and it's good. We might also just do it as catharsis as well, which is a little different. But in both of these ways, we might say that there's a kind of not only psychologically valuable contextualizing of suffering that we get in the kind of musical experience of the blues, because it's really tied to suffering as well. Um, and that's really part of being able to give meaning to our life. And I mean, Buddha, I think, would be kind of like warm to the idea of healing suffering. But as we discussed in class, Buddha goes really differently, I think, more in trying to eradicate it, get rid of it, right? So that's kind of, he's trying to get rid of the cause of it. And it's not obvious that that's even the intent behind the kind of healing of suffering through contextualizing and just music just feels good, right? That blues might be able to offer to suffering, but it's still a way of kind of spiritually coping with that same problem of life that Buddhism responds to. And there's that kind of interesting parallel, I think, between that, at least potentially non-theistic meaning giving practice in the blues and really a lot of the same kind of interests of regarding suffering, but a different approach that we get from Buddha. So that would be one example of how you could kind of integrate some of the blues theme. It's a little different from the assignment, but you could still kind of introduce some of that stuff if you wanted to here, if that was your thing. So you certainly don't have to. There's lots of different ways to go here. Nietzsche himself has lots of different things. And comparing Nietzsche and Nozick is probably something you could get a lot of mileage out of for kind of then representing, let's say, the atheist view here. We could see, at least I could see how this would go, as what you get by kind of combining Nozick and Nietzsche. There's a way in which they kind of, I don't want to say need each other, but I mean, maybe. Like Nozick's view is like very theoretical, and he's really trying to just give like the abstract structure, literally, of meaning, and he defines it as a kind of abstract structure of organic unity of organic unities. Nietzsche, on the other hand, gives us a really rich, vivid, allegorical version of things that doesn't have any direct, obvious theoretical structure, like Nozick does, like spelling out actual principles and definitions, building a theory. Nietzsche, rather, doesn't have that. So if you actually were able to put those two things together and get like a single view of a meaningful, non-theistic life by adding those two elements that complement each other, that would actually be pretty good. Then you've got something that you could compare to one of the religious perspectives. You might have something that you could bring into the blues, but you wouldn't need to. But you'd have to enough to run with there for the question. Alrighty, so at the end of the day, I think I'm sure I asked you to do something like, what do you think is the meaning of life? Or, well, maybe I didn't here. But anyway, we can do the kind of conclusion, really just wrapping it up. So, alrighty, hope that helps.